Want to hear some music?
I do.
Let's go on over and meet Sam Bodkin. He's the founder and CEO of a new company. Come on over here, Sam. That's okay. Called Groupmuse. And we brought two musicians here. James Jaffe, he's on the cello. Nice to see you, James. Eric Chin is on the violin. Sam, you must be a musician.
I'm actually not. I'm just a hardcore classical music fanboy.
So what was the idea of Groupmuse?
Well, it sort of came from a conversion experience I had when I was 19 years old. I was in the basement of a neighbor who is himself a great cellist, and he was working on a Beethoven string quartet that I'd never heard before. I was never a serious classical music listener, but, you know, I was a big music fan. I played guitar in bands and that sort of thing. But I discovered this piece of music, and it just cracked open my world.
Because you were sitting right there and hearing the instrument.
Well, actually, this was a recording.
Oh!
So this was somewhat atypical, and I didn't know how my obsession and evangelism would eventually manifest, but within about 6 months of hearing that first piece of music, I had decided I was going to devote my life to expanding the listenership for this music.
Oh, nice.
Which added so much to my interior life at a moment in culture that I think is pretty desperately lacking in beauty and depth and substance, and this ridiculously deep 1,000-year tradition of music seemed to, you know, provide it would just abound. The beauty just never stopped.
Right.
Haydn has 450 hours of music. Mozart has over 200. I mean, that's a lot to chew on for a lifetime.
Right.
So I fell mad for this music. I fell in with a group of musicians who were studying at New England Conservatory in Boston. And they would gather together in this apartment in Allston, Boston, which is a neighborhood of Boston. It's a rough neighborhood. Like, you don't want to walk around with bare feet because you'll get glass and nails in your feet. But you walk up these stairs into this apartment, and suddenly
beauty.
The most glorious music would just break through. And it was also a really good party because they were artists and they knew how to get down. And so I would leave with just this sense of well-being. I had connected to these magnificent people and heard this life-expanding music, and that's when it really occurred to me, this could be the way that people get into music. I mean, I was the only non-musician who would go to these evenings, but for me, it was this breakdown of enrichment because it was a great work of art, and enjoyment because it was a great party. And I had a pretty significant amount of experience with couchsurfing.com during a year off before college, which sort of woke me up to the possibility of social networking in the interest of sharing culture and sharing space. And I basically combined that couchsurfing experience with this musical experience, and I thought of Groupmuse really in my sort of senior year of college, end of my junior year, and then I graduated in 2012, and I immediately moved back in with my folks, like every entrepreneur should do as a character building exercise, and after a few months of just, like, you know, getting my brain hot with ideas and talking to as many people as would listen and getting spit all over their faces as I was just like...
No, really, it's great. I can...
The first Groupmuse was in January of 2013, and sort of at that Groupmuse, I said, who here wants to host the next one? Like 5 or 6 people raised their hands. Within 2 weeks, we had another one. Within a week, we had another one. By June of 2013, I'd been joined by my first co-founder, Ezra Weller, and then by September of 2013, I'd been joined by my second co-founder, the CTO, Kyle Schmalzi, and once the founding team had sort of congealed, that's when things really started taking off, because we found that actually not only is this just an incredibly easy and convenient way to pack your world with beauty, it also provides for an unbelievably warm, inviting, intimate, and unabashedly positive social experience.
I bet.
And I think that this is why Groupmuse has been speaking to so many people who don't normally identify as classical music listeners. It's just a nice way to spend a Thursday night. And because there's no amplification, there are no, you know, equipment vans or cables.
It's very intimate.
It's so intimate, it's so convenient. So whether you're at the top of a building or underneath a bridge, it really doesn't matter. We can bring the greatest masterworks that I think Western civilization can lay claim to. If we have 4 chairs, then we have a string quartet. If we have 2 chairs, we have a duo.
That's what we have here today.
Yeah, if you've got like a little, you know, Manhattan bedroom.
You can have a studio apartment, have 1 guy.
Exactly, and we've done that. And James has played what 50 group muses over the.
You've done that many?
Yeah, yeah.
So are there group muses going? You said Thursday night, but it goes on all the time.
Yeah, I mean in New York we basically have a group muse every night between 5 and 10 a week.
And what's the cost? How does it work? Do I go to groupmuse.com?
Yeah, so if you're interested in being a host, you go to groupmuse.com.
I want to have a party.
Totally. You go to groupmuse.com, you click host, you create the event, which basically means you input your address, how many people you can fit, how many of those people you want to be your friends, because at each Groupmuse event, it's not just for your friends, it's also a community building event.
It's a public event.
Exactly. So you're totally entitled to approve everyone who RSVPs. You know, they submit a Facebook link, they'll submit a headshot, and maybe a little message to you. If anyone makes you feel unsafe, you're entitled to say, like, you can't come. But for the most part, this is about inclusivity, and we encourage people to, you know, with open arms and an open heart, welcome these folks into their homes.
It's a shame. We've gotten very paranoid in this society. People don't connect anymore because we're afraid of letting somebody into our homes. So this is kind of a way to do it in a structured way.
Totally. I think that Airbnb went a long way in terms of breaking that ground and making the idea at least like acceptable.
Right.
And then these evenings are characterized by such warmth and such depth and positivity that you say, you know what, this was really great, I'm coming back tomorrow because there's one happening in your neighborhood tomorrow. And then pretty soon you start seeing familiar faces and you realize this could actually be a central facet of my social life. And even if you don't yet identify as a classical music listener, you might be going to a classical music concert or two every single week.
You have a way to monetize this, right?
Yes.
I mean, James and Eric are going to get paid.
Totally,
right?
totally.
Okay.
So the way that it works is if you want to RSVP to a Groupmuse, you go to groupmuse.com, you see what's happening in your area, and you pay $3 to RSVP. That reserves your spot. That does two things. One, it provides Groupmuse with desperately needed revenue, and two, it ensures that you'll actually show, even though it's a nominal fee.
Yeah, it's good to have a little commitment.
But then at the event, we have a minimum mandatory contribution of $10, but we encourage people to give anything and everything they can. All of that goes to the musicians. So, you know, if it's worth $40 to you to be sitting 3 feet from an exquisitely great musician blowing your mind with a masterwork that's been inspiring people for 250 years, that's worth $40 to you. Give the dude $40. He deserves it. He needs it. I mean, we need these great musicians.
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question for James and Eric. Now, you guys are professional musicians. You play in huge crowds. What's the difference between playing in a concert hall and in someone's living room?
There's you know, sometimes as an audience member, if I go to a big concert, I'll think, wow, that's really cool. However, I would never get a chance to ask the musicians how they actually like feel about it, right? There can sometimes be this almost invisible wall between performers and audience. That's something I love about Groupmuse is I feel like as a performer I get to know the audience members, sometimes to hear a very honest reaction about like what the music is doing for them. I find that to be a really cool aspect of it.
Well, you're going to play, for instance, something for us that's very modern.
Sure.
A piece by Kodai. Well, it's fairly modern, right? It's 20th century, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds a little different than what people would think of as chamber music, for instance. And so I would imagine that's an opportunity, too, to engage an audience and say, let's introduce you something a little bit different. What you're going to hear is atonal or it's different, and talk to them about that a little bit, right? Yeah. It's almost educational as much as a performance.
Who chooses the music that's going to be played at the Groupmuse?
Usually there's one musician who becomes the point of contact after they get assigned to a Groupmuse. They're just really responsible for calling their friends, as I do when I set up Groupmuses quite often.
Oh, so you'll bring in other musicians?
So I'll call musicians who I'm fortunate enough to know and enjoy working with, like Eric here. And then there's usually just a discussion. Hey, what do you guys want to play? What do you feel like playing? What's been sounding interesting to you recently? And then we'll put that on the program. So
$3 of every person goes to Groupmuse?
Yeah.
And the rest goes to the musicians?
Yeah.
That's a good deal. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the moment of RSVP to ensure, so that'll be a week before the actual show happens to ensure that you actually go, and then everything that you give at the event goes to the musicians. We also have the ability to contribute online. If you go to groupmuse.com/pay because you don't have cash on you, you can give online to the musicians.
Oh, that's nice, too.
So Uber has come up against the taxi companies. Airbnb, has issues
what is
with
the musicians
hotels.
union?
Like, are you guys finding that this disruption is bothering people who are more traditional?
This is actually a really interesting point. The path forward for Groupmuse in terms of developing as a business has emerged to be working with established institutions, venerable institutions that have existed for sometimes 100 years, sometimes more, because they really have an audience problem. You know, the classical music world depends on patronage, and that depends on cultivating a real love of music in folks at a young age. And then when they get to be, you know, of patronage age, and the local symphony orchestra comes a knocking, you know, are you going to give to them, or do you not even know who Beethoven is? That's the question.
And at this point, we're in a survival mode.
We're in
for symphonies, for opera.
So
we've got to get people excited about this kind of
in
music.
the crowd.
Yeah, yeah.
And so actually the institutions love us,
They must,
and we put together these things called Groupmuse Nights Out, where we provide discounted tickets to our users for, you know, concert hall evenings. You like the living room, Beethoven blew your mind, well, just wait till you hear his 7th Symphony.
Nice.
And I really think that makes a big difference for folks. We have this pathway in, and all of a sudden you get an email that says, hey, here's a discounted ticket, you should give this a shot. And so they go and they love it, and pretty soon they really start building a relationship with this community of art institutions.